welcome to this event. First, let me quickly present to you BLIX Network and who we are. So BLIX Network is a community of senior business leaders and professionals who champion diversity and inclusion. Our mission is to elevate the next generation of diverse and inclusive leaders through knowledge exchange and mentorship. And we do that. To do that, we share lessons from experienced leaders to benefit future leaders. And we do that through two main concepts. The first one is our sessions of one-to-many, and we call them knowledge exchange talks, just like the one we have today with Tony Effik. And we also have one-to-one sessions that are mentoring and coaching, and they're provided by our BLIX mentors. They're tailored to support diverse candidates in their career progression, personal development, and aspirations. So our BLIX mentors are senior business leaders of top tech companies, and they offer their time, knowledge, and guidance to help progress diverse talents for free. They assist BLIX mentees to get hired, promoted, and also scale up their startups. So here's a sneak peek of some of our BLIX mentors. There's more as well that you can discover on our website. So feel free to check them out. All of this is made possible by our amazing leadership team and coaches who volunteer their time and skills to build our dear BLIX community. We believe that our ideas plus action can bring change, and that will drive diversity in tech. So, at BLIX, we're knowledge sharing and making information accessible to empower future leaders. And it's a great opportunity for us to have Tony share his knowledge and experience with us. So I'm quickly going to introduce the speaker of the day. So Tony Effik is the Global Managing Director in Google's GCS division, where he leads a team focused on global products and sales activation for display, video, and creative solutions. He is an accomplished global executive, and he has decades of experience operating at the intersection of advertising, media, and digital technology. He has contributed to setting industry-wide best practices and standards both in the US and the UK with the Internet Advertising Bureau in viewability and social media. Tony is also an adjunct professor at Columbia University in the Department of Industrial Engineering and Operations Research, where he teaches digital business models to graduate engineers. He's also a known international speaker, and he has delivered keynote speeches at conferences, and he also judged key industry awards. Finally, Tony is a passionate diversity and inclusion champion, and he co-founded the Back and Brilliant Advocacy Network. This is a group of business leaders and people of all backgrounds who are united in creating a more diverse workplace by upskilling and coaching high potential talents. Now, after this good presentation, I'm going to hand it over to Tony. Thank you very much and enjoy the talk. Pass it over to you, Tony.
Thank you. Thank you. Am I in control of the presentation now?
Yes. Now you are. Over to you.
That's perfect. I'm just doing quick. All right, that picture you might have seen of me, that was pre-COVID, by the way. So my hair's grown and my beard is a bit more scruffy. So give me, I don't know what I'll do post-COVID, but watch this space. Thank you so much for that, Team BLIX. I'm really delighted and honored to be here. Thank you for this opportunity to share my story. And I'm going to tell what is a very personal story. And normally when I'm speaking publicly, I usually speak on a topic, a concept, work does happen, but I'm going to tell a very personal story today. So there's a little bit of a disclaimer in this because, you know, I'm going to share insights from the world of work that I have experienced. I think I'm fairly successful, but I'm not the most successful person in the world. There are people obviously who've climbed heights way higher than I may ever climb. But I've come a very long way in my journey. I come from very humble beginnings, is the first thing. So I've seen many levels, which I think gives my perspective a little bit of interest, if I can be bold enough to say that. I've also worked in many different places. And because I teach, and I've been teaching for the last 5-6 years, and I teach in an Ivy League school, and I've had hundreds and hundreds of students over the years. I've been able to see what they ask and where they land over time. So I've got this kind of jumble of experiences that I think for the first time I've been able to really put together and wanted to share with all of you guys. And so So basically, what I think that what that qualifies me to talk about is that I think I understand some of the problems with the world of work, and specifically with the world of work that I've come from, some of the disciplines and the sectors that I work in. It's not really moving forward. Oh, perfect. Okay, all right. So, and I'm going to boil it down to this one core issue, which is the problem with work. We all, when we're kids, told that we can be what we want, do what we want, etc. Okay, but in reality, there is a problem with that. And the problem with that is that you can't just choose what you want to do. You also have to be chosen. That's the sad piece of this whole thing. We all have these aspirations about what we want to do, but it's what you would call in economics a matchmaking market. There's two sides to this. Yeah, it's what you want, and actually what you're choosing to do as well. Even if you actually go and do your own business and you're an entrepreneur, there's another side to the equation as well, which is like either the funding you're getting or the customers you get or the markets you operate in. There's always a second component of it. And I want to kind of like build on that point. It's not working beautifully for me. The next slide. Yeah, okay, perfect. I'll ask when I just give a sign, we'll just go to the next slide each time. I don't know, it's not working for me. Okay, so there's been a lot of thinking done about this, and I'm going to quote two names here. One person referencing another person. So Malcolm Gladwell talks a lot about this, and this is this idea that our societies are not really good at matching talent with opportunity. You know, particularly the talent of our underdogs. And Gladwell, in some recent work, has been quoting this. Well, actually, he's a core philosopher, but he spent a lot of time in psychometric research, which is, he died recently, James Flynn, and he talks about this idea of capitalization risk, which is how good is a society at taking people who are good enough to do that job and getting those people to that job. And so if you think about it, you know, if you are qualified, if you have the capability of becoming a manager or a professional, how good is somebody at getting somebody to become a professional? And the statistic Gladwell quotes is that, roughly speaking, the number of people who can actually do a job, that get to that job in business, is around 60%, which is not a high number, you know. And you got to imagine that many of those people are people who you think could probably do that job. So let's go to the next slide. So in other words, there is a lot inbuilt in our systems that means it's really hard to get to what you think you should be able to do. Yeah, even if you're qualified to do that thing. And guess what? If you're an underdog, and I see myself as an underdog, it's even harder. So, you know, you have a lot of inbuilt disadvantages. And really part of your job as an underdog, and an underdog means so many different things. You can come from privilege, you can come from all sorts of backgrounds, but it just means that you have inherent disadvantages. You could be born in the wrong country, you know, but qualified to be a software engineer, and you need to be in Silicon Valley. You could think you want to work in the movies, but you're in the wrong part of the world to do that. There's all sorts of different things that mean you have some inherent disadvantages. I come to the table with many disadvantages that I'm going to be able to talk about, and I feel that you can turn disadvantages into advantages through a little bit of preparation and definitely a little bit of luck. I never used to believe in luck. My wife used to say to me, Tony, you're one of the luckiest people I've ever met. And I used to say, this wasn't luck. And then after this, a little bit of maturity and a bit of some time to look back at my life, I started to see how much of a role that luck plays. So if we go to the next slide. And this is a quote. So Seneca, Roman philosopher, had this quote, and I only got to know it recently, but I kind of latched onto it, which is this idea that luck's what happens when preparation meets opportunity. And the word preparation is really important to me, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that as we go through this. And this, the core of this is that luck is going to come your way, but you cannot take advantage or capitalize on that luck, to use the language of Gladwell and James Flynn, if you were not prepared for it. And I'm going to talk a little bit, most of this presentation is about preparation and what my preparation has been. Because there's been a tremendous amount through my life and through my experience around just serendipity and just falling into situations and things happening to me, but me being ready for those situations when they came up. We go to the next slide. So this is me. This is like in a slide of my story and who I am and where I came from. So I was born in Nigeria and grew up in the UK. So I was an immigrant into the UK. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And then moved to the USA for work, probably about roughly around 11 years ago. And I've worked, roughly speaking, in 3 different industries. So advertising, media, and technology, all kind of like intersecting each other. I've worked for some big advertising groups, mostly doing work with digital builds, websites, applications, but also done TV and traditional advertising campaigns. And in the last 6-7 years, I've worked at a gigantic entertainment company, Comcast, NBC, Universal, and I'm currently at Google, as Maria introduced me at the beginning. And I've been working with Columbia Engineering now for the last 6 years. So that, in a nutshell, is my story. But if we go to the next slide, I'll give that a little bit more context so you can hear a bit more. So I'm one of these nylon people. Although I've worked around the world, I spent a lot of time in East Asia, in Korea, in Japan, and we talk a lot about that. I've worked across Europe, but the core of where I've lived as an adult has been in the UK and the USA. You can see my transition career-wise from agencies on the left-hand side in the UK, principally doing digital work. I came to the United States for publicists. I worked with this agency called RGA, which is part of the Interpublic Group, does a lot of pioneering work in the digital space. And then you can see over time how I've worked at Comcast, NBC Universal, Google, and Columbia. So that's my story. The next slide is really interesting because we really start to get to the core of how I think about my career. What you will note in this slide is that over time, so you can see I worked in advertising and digital agencies, and I became specifically focused in digital agencies because at the beginning, the digital agencies are really small, and most of the work they were looking for people who knew how to do digital work in traditional agencies. I'm a strategic planner who also has a bent for analytic work. Then you can start to see around the time I was at the Publicist Group, I started to do work in social. Still did all the stuff I did prior to that. And then as I moved into RGA, you can start to see I started to add media, machine learning to that, which is essentially what got me engaged with Columbia Engineering. Obviously, it's an engineering school, and I focus on digital business models and on operating systems. And then over time, as I moved into Comcast, NBC Universal, and Google, what you can start to see is that I've added this kind of more depth around. I was always building products, etc., but to work for companies that own their products. Previously, I worked helping companies make products themselves, but latterly, I've been helping really work on companies who own products and then working between sales teams, product teams, and go-to-market, as well as in product road mapping. So but what's really important about this visual is that what you'll see is that it's been additive. Every few years, something else gets added on. And that's really been the cornerstone of how I think about myself, which is to say, every few years, I take a bet on myself, and I take a bet on where I think the market is going to go, because that is one of the cornerstones of objective difference. So if we go to the next slide. But if I would have been born maybe 5 years earlier, definitely 10 years earlier, I might not have been able to make that journey. It's that simple. I have been able to ride a technology revolution, and I'm going to build on some of this later on, all the way from the time where we were using mini computers, all the way through now, where we're getting essentially the revolution in the media and the technology landscape. I'll build more on this as we go through. So if you go to the next slide. But there's very few people I grew up with who've had a similar journey. I can count them on one hand. Okay, and so I was kind of disadvantaged from the very beginning. I was an immigrant as a child. That's actually the place I grew up, in the Ashburton estate in South London, in Wandsworth. So I grew up in social housing, and in America would call that a project, and the UK would call that a council estate. And that's me in my school picture right there. And what you see there is, very few people in that school had very bright education prospects. Most of the time people didn't really get what they were hoping for out of life. And And that was just normal, even in immigrant families that came from, more, with ambitious backgrounds, the cards didn't fall where you want, the dice didn't fall where you wanted them to fall. So inherently kind of like walked into this market with tons of disadvantages. So we go to the next slide. And at a time when the UK was going through, had a tremendous amount of racism in it. So it wasn't kind of like rare to walk into signs like this, keep it white. That sign there is a real sign from a bed and breakfast. No Irish, no blacks, no dogs. They didn't necessarily put it in order, but those were the signs that were all around. We had the National Front, now, the British National Party, skinheads everywhere. There's certain parts of town you couldn't go into because, or you always knew you had to go with friends because anything could happen to you. We had the Brixton riots, when I was growing up there, and then we had certain parts of the political establishment. That's a guy called Powell in the UK who made an infamous speech about immigrants as well. So there was a very hostile environment during this time period, running from the 60s to the 70s all the way through to the 80s. And obviously it's much better these days, but this was hostile. So the idea that somebody was going to become an executive who came from that background I just described seemed almost improbable or impossible. So if we go to the next slide. And we all grew up with this fact in our head, that we all knew, and there was a saying, you got to work twice as hard to get half as much if you're black. Okay, that was just it was, everyone knew that. Okay, and statistically, that's also correct, because 65% of black, this is an American stat, 65% of black professionals say that black employees have to work harder in order to advance, but only 60% of their white colleagues agree with that statement. Now, either it's a figment of the black people's imagination or the white people are living in a different reality, or there's a complete misunderstanding of all of this. So these issues are issues that we had to think about and deal with before there was actually any kind of integration, any kind of presence in the workplace of people who would look like me. And we know this to be true, this idea of working twice as hard to get half as much, if we go to the next slide, because we know statistically, when you look at, and it's particularly bad for black women, this is again the USA, the way to read this table is if you look at the column, that's what a black woman is paid for every dollar paid to a white non-Hispanic man. And then if you look at the bottom row, master's degree. So if you're a black woman, you have a master's degree, you earn 64 cents in the dollar for the equivalent of a white guy in the United States. Same qualification. So the idea of working twice as hard to get half as much wasn't just something people were saying. It wasn't quite half as much as 64% as much. For two people with the exact qualification, and I could share many more stats like this. Fairly depressing stats. You walk into the market having all of this behind you. How on earth do you become successful? How on earth do you even kind of turn up to be successful? So I'm going to kind of explore some of those ideas. If you go to the next slide. Well, one of the things I was advantaged with was that I actually got a chance to do a bunch of jobs, which kind of started to expose me to a whole bunch of things. Not fun jobs. The guy who's in the top left-hand corner, kind of like, cleaning the floor in a hospital, I've done that job. I've cleaned offices. I've delivered newspapers. I've worked in a factory on the conveyor belt. Top right-hand corner, I've done telemarketing. And then I worked on the checkout. So if we move from that gave me a lot of exposure to kind of like types of work and actually how people behave when they're in work. So if we go to the next slide, I'm going to try and pick up my speed a little bit. So I wasn't clear which road to take, but I had some intuitions, and I'm going to share some of the intuitions I had, which were born of my background. So if you go to the next slide, I knew I didn't have relationships. I had to rely on my expertise. I didn't have them. So I didn't have any sponsors. I didn't have a network. What I knew then is that I would have to focus on knowing things. If you go to the next slide. I knew, therefore, I couldn't be a generalist because that requires you to have relationships. I had to be a specialist because that's what expertise has. Go to the next slide. I knew I definitely didn't want to be somebody that people judged on in a very subjective way based on someone's taste. I like you because you write this way. I like you because you dance this way. I like you because you went to this place. I knew I wanted to be judged based on the things I knew. And the harder the things I knew, the more advantage I feel I would have. So if we go to the next slide. So, and I also knew that the people who tended to focus on what was hot today tended to put themselves into much more difficult situations. They tended to lean much more towards subjectivity. So I felt I always had to go towards where the ball was going to be tomorrow. Where is the world going to be tomorrow? What's going to be hot tomorrow? Focus on that thing, because that's the thing people are going to have much more demand for. You go to the next slide. And I knew I couldn't, once I got to that place, stop learning. I had to keep learning, which gave me a commitment to lifelong learning. So, and also I knew that basically whenever I got a job, and this always proved to be the case, I never got the choice, the nice projects. I never got the sexiest accounts. I never got the hottest things. So I had to do that work that came to me, but I also had to try and drive additional work that helped expand what I was going to be able to do. I call that concept leapfrogging, always kind of not just giving them, do what they ask you, but do a little bit more and then push to the next idea, put another thing on the table for them to think about. And if you go to the next slide. And some people I've seen throughout my career were able to go under the wing of somebody, and then as that person rose or moved, they were able to follow that person through. I've never really had that. There have been people who have been really important to me through my career of all kinds of backgrounds. But I've never really followed somebody. There's people who I've seen who every job they've had, they've been under the wing of somebody and just followed them through. Never had that. I never really even aspired to that, to be quite honest. I'm a passionate believer in the power of ideas, and I follow ideas. So wherever ideas take me, that's where I end up going. Because if you think about it, if you follow the thread through this so far, you can start to see if you believe in expertise, if you believe in specialism, if you believe in knowing hard things, if you believe in thinking about what's going to be hot tomorrow and what's hot today, you have to follow ideas. And it's a little bit Alice in Wonderland. I'm going to just keep following. Curiosity is going to keep taking me wherever it takes me. So if you go to the next slide. So that leads me to objective difference. Okay, and so let me just define that for you. And I juxtapose objective difference to subjective judgment. And so, as based on my background, with disadvantages, based on being an underdog, I'd never wanted to be in a place where I was easily disposable. Everyone's disposable, everybody. But if you know things that few other people know, it makes it a little bit more difficult. And I'll bring this story to life. I had a really good friend of mine who had one of the best jobs in London when I was growing up in this business. And he was a music journalist. He got to go to all the best parties when the bands were in town. He got the guest list. Everyone loved what this guy was doing. Then he had a new editor of his magazine who came in and just didn't like the music he was writing about or his style. And then this guy just got cut off. And that really spooked me at the time. And I felt to myself, I never want to be in a place where I could be subjectively judged in that way. I want it to be harder to get rid of me. I want to know things that people don't have to like me in order to be able to hire me. People have to need me in order to hire me. And so objective difference is about that. And I'm going to just define it in the next couple of slides. So objective difference. So what is it? It's basically about mastering hard things that are the next big challenges in the economy. So key components of that is identify the next big thing in your industry. Become a subject matter expert in that next big thing. Develop a personal brand. Tell people about what you are an expert in. And then commit to lifelong learning, because that thing that was the next big thing is not going to be the next big thing forever. And then track your growth. Good example about the next big thing not being the next big thing. I remember coming up in this business, if you were a Flash developer back in the day, you were the hottest thing in town. You could write your own checks at the beginning of the internet because everyone wanted cool Flash developers. And if you stayed being a Flash developer, deep into your career, the world has moved on. Okay, and so the continual lifelong learning, the continual relentless pursuit of that thread, like Alice in Wonderland, and curiosity and reinventing yourself and replenishing your expertise is a central component of objective difference. So if you go to the next slide. So here's a framework I want to share with you. This is kind of how I think about it. I've just visualized it for this. So one of the first things is that too many people get too deeply ingrained, just look at the 6 inches by 6 inches in front of them in the job they're currently doing. And they never have the helicopter view to say, where is their industry today and where do they fit in their industry today? The next question you have to ask yourself then is to start to say, where will this industry be tomorrow? Okay, this isn't an easy thing to do because you're kind of almost prophesizing, yeah? You're forecasting, you're thinking about the future. But that's really important because that's what people want. They want somebody who has this helicopter view and has a sense of where the business, the industry, the discipline's going. You're willing to pay premium for that kind of person. Then once you're able to answer these two fundamental questions, you can then go to the third question, which is what do I need to do to prepare for that future? If you go to the next slide, clearly there are mechanisms you have to bring into place. So you should be reading widely, you should be talking to people, you should be networking, you should be researching. The amount of effort and time I put into really mastering my craft, learning about what's going on around me, and just accumulating knowledge from thought leaders and from people who know stuff. And I read huge amounts in order to really understand where I am today. Okay, because your personal experience in your day job isn't going to give you the helicopter view that you need in order to be able to answer that first question. The second question is just a hypothesis. It's a bet. It's about what you think might happen. No one's going to know whether it's going to happen or not. It's a risk. But if you don't think about that second question, you end up in the place the Flash developer ends up, which is to say, you don't, because you've got the technical capacity to be able to reinvent the technology you use. You've got the reputation in that, but you have to reinvent yourself. You should have moved from Flash to HTML5 or whatever it was that was going to be. Okay, and then obviously, if you have this hypothesis, validate it, talk to people around it in order to do that. So if you go to the next slide, I can give you a quick example of where I was able to do it. So I was working at an agency called RGA, an amazing reputation around the world. I was building a team, a global team, around something called Media and Connections, where we were working a lot with digital media. I had engineers in my group. And I started to see when I was getting digital video briefs that I started to also get TV briefs. And then the agencies that were originally got TV briefs started to get digital video briefs. So I come up with this conclusion, which is, the media business is divided into analog and digital with separate and distinct skills for each silo. And there wasn't really a common language or a common currency. So this is around 2014, maybe a little bit earlier, 2012. And I landed on this conclusion that, well, the media business in the future is going to need people who speak both languages, analog and digital, as the industry moves towards automation and convergence. Content will always be handcrafted, but you have people from both silos who didn't really understand each other. And so you needed people in the middle of that. I was more in one silo, the digital side. And so what I felt I had to do to prepare was to essentially fortify my digital knowledge with a mastery of TV and the film business and how it worked, and then develop a language around all of this and show examples of that. So I spent pretty much from around 2014 to around 2016 kind of like building up this additional skill set, starting to do work, promoting that work in my agency with my clients. And come 2016, I get hired at NBC Universal to do exactly that job. Okay, and I'm just giving you this one example of it, but I've done this all the way through my career. And again, going back to objective difference, it's about saying, where is this business going? What's my role in this business? And then trying to work and then build towards that. So if you go to the next slide, I've been able to make these bridges over time. And I'm going to give, so this particular one around the 2010s, leading to the 2020s, and you can start to see some of the relationships there. And I'm going to talk about some of these as we go through. Just conscious of time, so I can get some questions here. If we go to the next slide. So the first lucky break, as I said, I came from a lower income family, but for some improbable reason, my mother, we didn't have the money. And in fact, even if you talk to people in Silicon Valley today, very few of them had early home computers. We were bought home computers so we could play games at home. Don't know why my mother bought this because I couldn't afford it, but that's a Commodore 64, an Amstrad CP64. And I went to a school that actually had one of the first mini computers. No idea why, it was an impoverished background, but through pure luck, I was able to get comfortable with computing fundamentals, coding. I got exposed to early ideas in computing such as networks, and that gave me confidence around technology. So we'll go to the next slide. in the 90s, I was working at a publishing company in a suburb of London sending out CD-ROMs and magazines. And the founder came into the office one day and said, I'm going to give you all this thing called the internet. And I remember I was working on CompuServe. I got to do my first international business trip to Germany. And they were saying there's this thing called the internet. We're really worried about it. And I thought, well, no one's an expert on the internet. Why can't I be an expert on the internet? And I'd already done all this work in advance, making myself comfortable with this. And what that then allowed me to do was to start working for larger advertising and digital agencies and to start building a career in strategy and digital marketing. We go to the next slide. Then, all of a sudden, Web 1.0 was disrupted by Web 2.0, which is essentially the dawn of social media. And I think it's around this time I met Injara, actually. I can see you on the call there. And I said, okay, well, I need to become an expert on social. And I wasn't. So I started a blog, comments on the social graph, and I'll blog about it. And then I learned so much by blogging. I even took money from my own account, and I put money into Facebook to buy ads, so I knew how the mechanics of social worked. And in order to drive traffic, and then I put myself forward as the chair of the IAB Social Media Council. It was an election, and I won the election, and I chaired the Social Media Council. That gave me tons more exposure, reinforced my reputation. Again, this is all about preparation. I knew how to be an expert on social media. So I created a blog about social media and wrote about it every week for at least a year, and then brought some of that thinking and insights into my day job. And then after a while, I was working at this point at Publicis. They started to send me around the world to talk and represent this thinking, because very few people had these ideas back at this time. And I became one of the few people that really understood Web 2.0 and Web 1.0, and I could do this multi-platform ecosystem work. Next slide. And here are examples of that. So that started to build my publicity. I got hired as a planning chief. I got asked to write articles in trade magazines, Marketing Week campaign. And then obviously once I looked much younger there, obviously, IAB Social Media Council, that gave me, an extra level of exposure. If we go to the next slide. And then what that meant was that when they needed somebody to do this work globally, at Publicis, who would they ask? I was one of the few people who knew about this stuff. Again, preparation and opportunity met, and that led to luck. And so I got the invitation to move to the United States. And then after a while, I moved from Publicis to RGA, where I was asked to build a global function. And then because I was one of the few people who understood the intersection of all of this, Columbia University invited me to become an adjunct professor there. I'd done tons of work and research with them over the years as well. And so this allowed me to accumulate really rare skills at the cutting edge, and allowed me to differentiate myself from other leaders, okay? And so I basically had a front row seat watching where the world was going and working in some of the world's leading content and digital businesses. So if we go to the next slide, which is where I am today, is that I was then able to I started getting invited to speak in places like Ad Age, got things published in the New York Times, judged the Effies, tons of awards, and the work I was doing started to get profiled because I had this objective difference in what I understood about the world and this expertise that at this time very few people had. So we go to the next slide. And then we went forward to today, and I was able to work at NBC Universal at a very critical time in the transformation of that company, in how they changed the products, sales model, organizational design. That then allowed me to work with some of the world's leading people, best people in the world around film, TV, video, and how to monetize them. And I saw how billion-dollar organizations start to transform themselves at a time of such disruption. What did this prepare me? What did this prepare me for? Working at Google at a key phase in their transformation. And at this point, having been through this journey, I started to say to myself, how do we institutionalize this? My wife and I got together and we created this thing called the Black and Brilliant Advocacy Network, because I felt at this point, I've been through such a journey. We wanted to create some kind of a system, some kind of an infrastructure to make sure people like me didn't have to go through this journey alone in the way that we did. And so I then felt I was in a place where I could start to share my knowledge much more broadly. So the next slide just gives some examples of me really talking at events. So, so again, this is at NBC Universal, that's the forays. There's the, the ANAs, there's a bunch of stuff. If we go to the next slide. And then I started to speak more widely, spoke of the United Nations, Department of Economic Affairs and Social Affairs on digital skills. And I've always been a strong advocate of diversity in all its forms, including gender diversity in leadership, the female quotient, I spoke there. And so all of these things basically, and if you go to the next slide, are really about this idea that there are more than one way you can get to the top. But there's this concept, if you called the Mafia Effect. If you know your Bible, and I know a little bit of it from my childhood, is that Matthew chapter 25, there is a parable called the Parable of the Talents. And there is an economist at Columbia, he was at Columbia, who came up with this concept called the Matthew Effect, which basically describes this idea how the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, because the rich have these inherent advantages. In Matthew 25, it's about one person's given some talents, some person's given more, and it's what they do with it. But when you have knowledge, knowledge builds on knowledge. In the same way, talent builds on talent. And so the more problems I solved, and this, if you look at all of these visuals on the left, they all were different times of my life, all felt disconnected. But actually, after a while, when you solve thousands of problems, they actually start to look the same because they just re-emerge. And so actually, I've solved thousands of problems over the years in multiple industries and multiple countries over multiple decades. And what starts to happen is you start to get better at it than others, and you start to be able to do it faster than others. And so that's why I say is that objective difference is fundamentally about finding a specialism, getting really good at it, but taking this helicopter view, because after a while, you get really good at this stuff. But what I would say, though, in closing, I think if you go to the next slide, is that the key thing, though, is that I would advise on specialization very early in your career, but don't specialize for too long. At some point, you have to generalize. Okay, because you start off, particularly if you're an underdog like I am, the only way you're going to get into the room is being a specialist. Everyone I've seen who's kind of risen and got successful, who came from an underdog background, was specialist. And then at some point, if you really want to become a leader and you want to be an executive at the top of the ladder, and I haven't got to the top of the ladder yet, but if you want to be at the top of the ladder, you have to become a generalist. So here are my things here. And if you go to the next slide. Thank you. That's me. I had to do that quickly. So I'm happy to take questions.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Tony. I just pulled out a t-shirt. More blacks, more dogs, more Irish.
Good for you.
Just to play on your earlier sign of the challenging times that your parents must have experienced as they came to the UK. I just want to pick up on one point, which was brilliant. It's this Matthew effect. The rich get richer, or the more knowledgeable get continue to increase their knowledge. And I think that's very much what you're trying to do with Black and Brilliant, and we're very much trying to do that with BLIX as well. What do you think really needs to happen if you're starting out and you don't have access to this network, and maybe people in your family have never gone to university? What are the tips you'd give to those diverse candidates or underrepresented candidates to try and increase that knowledge and increase their network? What would be that secret you'd give to them?
Yeah, I think the key thing is that you got to pick your lane. Yeah, it's just like you really have to do your homework and pick your lane. So what I would say, first of all, is you can be on the same highway, motorway, depending where part of the world you're in right now, and you could be in a slow lane. So pick your industry and your discipline. So you should know what is going to be hot, because you could be like, I'll give you an example. Let's say you have good technical skills and you end up being a front-end developer. That's not a bad job. That's a great job. But if you are right now, if you've got the technical capability and you could be an AI engineer or data scientist, I can tell you that that's a faster lane. So pick your lane, okay? The next thing I would say, so once you pick your lane and pick a fast lane, and these don't all come along all the time. I was lucky. I had the client server revolution, then I had the internet revolution, social revolution, and now we're in the kind of AI revolution. I've been lucky in my lifetime to be a part of that. So you need to be thinking about what's next, and then you need to find mentors in the network in that space. That's the most important thing I would say, because you don't want to get people who are in a space that can't help you, or is a slow lane as opposed to a fast lane.
Brilliant. That makes a lot of sense. And I think it goes back to your earlier point of you think you come into the office and you keep your head down and people will pick you out and say, hey, you need to be promoted. It's about building that network, creating those connections with different mentors, asking questions and finding opportunities to demonstrate that knowledge that you have. But this was super insightful.
Kurt, let me just jump in on that as well. I think people think that mentors are the ones who are the only ones giving. They're not just giving, because if you come in and you have ideas about the industry, the business, you have a vision, you're giving the mentor something. Mentors want to test their ideas. They want an interaction. They want a conversation and a dialogue. So if you come in with a strong world view, they get as much out of it as you do. 100%. So that's the other side of the equation.
100%. I think that's a critical point. Absolutely. It's a two-way street. There's so much that the mentor can benefit from the mentee who's from a different generation and probably on the cutting edge of many of the technologies. So yeah, thank you for that as well. I'll open it up to the audience. Thanks again, Tony. This was great.
Thank you.
Any questions for me?
Hello, everyone. I'll be in charge of the Q&A section. I could see the chat blowing up already. I can say this for myself. Whilst going through that whole presentation, I think a massive smile came up on my face just in certain sections that I can definitely resonate with and certain achievements that I would like to achieve myself. So I'm going to give the floor back to you guys because I can see how excited you guys were as much as I am. So the first question that I can see in the chat, I will ask. If not, I'm taking the stage, guys. So good luck.
Hi, can I ask a question?
Go for it.
Hi, and thank you for a wonderful presentation. It's really good to see the focus of making yourself unique. I'm really curious about the results of the poll at the beginning to see where people placed themselves before the presentation. And my question is really something around some of the unique challenges that are faced by people from, from BAME communities. You know, I'm currently reading a book by Brené Brown, edited by Brené Brown and Tarana Burke, which is called You Are Your Best Thing. And it talks about the kind of trauma that is experienced by people who come from minority backgrounds through shame and guilt and other kinds of, you know, calling out on, you know, that they play to. So I'm welcoming your views as well about this thing, because what these researchers are saying is that shame, which is a collective trauma, does impact on progression that people from minority backgrounds sometimes have. I welcome your views.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a bunch of, remember what I said about the underdog? There's a bunch of disadvantages that underdog walks into the market with, into the workplace with. Unfortunately, though, historically, there hasn't really been a lot of consideration given to that, you know? And I'm the kind of guy who doesn't necessarily walk into a room and expect that from people, to be brutally honest. And so I had a lot of trauma, a lot of stuff going through my life, my experience, my background. I'd be in rooms that were unfamiliar, in buildings sometimes, literally. In my time, the buildings might not have anybody else like me. And, you know, and I'd be in some hostile environments. But the reality of the situation is that I would never let that hold me back. And everyone should walk into that room. It doesn't matter what's going on inside, just, you know, dust off your shoulders, polish your shoes, put a smile on your face, walk into that room and do what you need to do. Because it's like, you know, I love sports analogies. You're playing a football game. You know that the other team's going to tackle you, but you don't say, okay, I'm not going to take a shot. And I know this sounds, I don't know, maybe it sounds too muscular, maybe it sounds too aggressive, maybe it sounds maybe too hard, but the reality of the situation is I've got a low estimation of what people are going to do for me because I've never had that. I've always felt I had to just take care of myself, with the exception of my family, and do that. That doesn't take away the fact that there is all this trauma. It doesn't take away the fact that people should do more for you. It doesn't take away the fact that it's a hostile environment. But the reality of the situation, you know, and it doesn't take away. I mean, I feel like maybe I should have done even better in my career than I've done today, and I should have got where I've got way earlier. So I'm not saying that those are not realities, but you cannot at any point let those traumas and that weight hold you down.
That's lovely. So what I'm hearing from you is you say that there is something about us taking control over what we can take control over, and choices, and actually do our own thing and believe from within what can happen and influence without. And actually we can create a reality that is different because of the attitude we've taken towards it.
Yes, because you know, that doesn't mean you're not going to face all the stuff that I've talked about. You're going to, you know, and Carl and I've talked about this, you're still going to be in an office where people are going to be hostile to you. You're still going to be in an environment that's going to hold you back. But if you accept that, that's what they want. Don't accept it.
Yeah, I just want to add into that. I think it's such an insightful point, and thanks for the question, Tess. I think we often think trauma is a bad thing, but coming through trauma and being able to stand up resilient is such a boost to confidence, because you know that no matter what gets thrown at you, you'll stand up stronger. For lots of people, they don't experience that until later in life. Suddenly a traumatic event happens and they're like, whoa, I don't know how to deal with this. But having some more of those challenges in early life, you build a strong resilience. And I think, as Tony said, I knew no one else was coming to help me out. There's no handouts. It's either I get this sorted myself or else it doesn't get fixed. Whereas often people are brought up in an environment where I'll call mommy, I'll call daddy, and it gets sorted. But if there's no one there to call, you got to figure out how you turn that challenge into an opportunity and come up with solutions really quickly. So I think we often forget the importance of resilience and how Black, female, ethnic minority leaders have to be so much more versed and experienced in resilience, which is critical for leading in any business.
Love it. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Those were some absolutely fantastic insights from everyone, actually. Thank you for that. Okay, guys, before we get to our next question, we'd like to say thank you for the first engagement to the poll. And as a surprise, we have another one for you guys. So I'm just going to let the team post that for you guys, and I'll ask one of the questions that I saw into the chat that I thought was really nice. And that question is, how do you deal with the problem of imposter syndrome?
Were you asking me that question, or I was trying to do the survey?
Yes, sorry, my apologies, Tony. Yes, someone asked you about how do you deal with the problem of imposter syndrome?
Yeah, the funny thing is, like, I didn't know the phrase imposter syndrome until very recently, but the truth be told, I did feel it, but I think it has multiple dimensions. Let me explain what I mean by that. And I'm going to build on a point that Carl made, which is to say that there's two types of imposter syndrome. There's imposter syndrome, which is like, this job is too big for me, I can't do this, or they think I'm somebody that I'm not, that kind of concept. Yeah, because this is like, I'm not in this job, I'm not qualified, that kind of imposter syndrome, or they're crediting me for things I shouldn't get credit for. There's that piece. But when you take that thing and you subdivide it, there is always this issue, which is like, do I have the aptitude to do this job versus do I have the skills and the expertise to do this job? Those are two different things, and they all kind of like ladder into imposter syndrome. Yeah? So for example, I have been in situations when I was coming up and I'm like, I don't know if I know, you know, I feel I've got the aptitude for this, but I haven't got all the knowledge and the skills. But the reality of the situation is I actually lean into that because I know that when I'm in those kind of situations, those are growth moments. Those are situations where I can actually, because I never doubted my aptitude to be able to do a job. What I doubted was whether I had all the right skills at that moment to do that job. What I always do in that situation, because I always do have that imposter syndrome thing. I don't call it that. I just say like, man, I'm not ready yet, but I have to catch up. So there have been jobs in the distant past where I'm like, man, I got to buy every book on this topic. I got to speak to everyone I know on this topic, and I got to fill that bucket, the expertise bucket. But what I would say, the aptitude bucket, I've never doubted, because I say to myself, man, I'm working with people who've had these elite educations, elite backgrounds, and they're doing the same job as me. So either I've done really well, they've done really badly, And so I've never doubted that side. What I've sometimes been is in situations where I've had to stretch myself expertise-wise. And as you know, that's my calling card. I will fill that bucket however it comes. And so what I would say is that you can make that work. You can fill that bucket just by putting the work in. Just fill the knowledge gaps, and you can have a whole other conversation about how you do that. But so the example I gave was the social media piece, which is like, man, I knew I had to be an expert in it. I started a blog in it, and I write provocative articles, ask myself questions each week, talk to people. I paid my own money to drive traffic to my blog using social media so I could learn the mechanics of how social advertising worked. It was very new at that time. And then that led me to a place where I became an industry leader on it. And so I didn't know about it, but I made myself know about it. Was I an imposter at that initial phase? Yes, I was, because I didn't know anything about it. but I never doubted my ability. And the thing I would say, which is so important, people will hit you on your belief, your self-belief. People will hit you on self-belief. And if they succeed in hitting you on self-belief, it's over. Because it's like, it's contagious. People will see it. They'll feel it. You will feel it. So one thing, and I've been in so many situations where people say, oh, that guy Tony's not so good. He's not so, leave him out here, leave him out there. And then over time, you might think that you don't have the skills or the capability. And I'd never let that get me down. I don't know where it came from. I don't know if it's innate or I just picked it up along the way, but I don't let them get on top of me. I'd never do. So yes, I felt it, but I don't let it. But in the expertise, not in the aptitude.
I love that. I just want to add to that as well, Tommy and Dafa. I think it comes back to resilience as well. If you know that you're going to be in situations where you're uncomfortable, or you're the only person in the room, the only person in the building, as Tony said, and you've got through that, it builds a sense of, oh, well, I've been through the worst of it. And I think it's this growth mindset. I think there's a brilliant quote that says, if you're willing to suck at something for a long period at the start, you'll be successful. A lot of people come up against things where they're not comfortable, they've never done it before, and they just fold. I can't do it. Whereas I think what you're saying there, Tony, is it's take it, bring it on. I've been through worse than this. Show me what you got. I know that I'm going to push through it and I'm going to come out stronger at the other end. So I think it's healthy to have imposter syndrome. Otherwise you go in way too confident and then you'll trip up on the first hurdle. I think you need to have that empathy, that understanding, and that awareness that things may go wrong, but if they do, it's okay. I'll learn from it. So I think that's a good way to kind of frame it and think about it, just building on Tony's points.
Thank you very much for those fantastic answers, guys. All right, just to be conscious of time, I'm going to make the last question quite difficult for both of you to answer. So that question is going to be, what do you do to build a diverse pipeline when hiring? And to make this question difficult for you guys, for both of you to answer, you have to answer it in one line, one sentence. Tony, you can go first, or Carl, you can go first.
I'm happy to go first. What, one line or one word? Did you say one line?
One line.
Oh, you've been generous. Okay.
Generous, yeah.
I think you got to fish where the fish are. Too many recruiters are kind of like, oh, this is what we've always done in this way in these places. The talent exists out there. And so if you can't look in the way that, if you want diverse talent, you got to look where diverse talent lives and works and spends time, etc. And so, one good example, just to bring it to life a little bit, everyone is now getting this idea in the US to recruit from HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. Yeah. But and now everyone's hunting those. But what they don't realize also as well is that there are Black sororities and fraternities. Like Kamala Harris was in a Black sorority. They don't know these, so they don't even know what keywords to use in order to go after these kinds of people. If they would have been smart enough, they might have hired what the person became the future vice president. If you knew where to fish, if you would got deeper into the culture, fish where the fish are. That's what I'd say.
Yeah, I think that's a great one. Fish where the fish are. And I think something similar I'd say is, if you do what you've already always done, you're going to get what you've always gotten. right? If you keep on doing the same things and saying there's a problem, we don't have any diverse candidates, just to Tony's point, well, you're fishing in the wrong area. It's like saying if a large company said, we can't get any customers. We just can't get any customers, so we're going to have to close the business. Nobody says that. What they say is, how do we think about this in a different way? How do we challenge our paradigm? What are we doing wrong? How do we get the customers through different channels? How do we communicate in a different way? How do we resonate with them? So if you can fix the problem to get more customers to buy your products and services, you can fix it to get more people into your business who are diverse and inclusive. It's just thinking about the problem in a different way, as if it's as if it affects your profits, right? And maybe one day it will.
Wow, those were fantastic answers. Thank you very much for all that excellence. All right, guys, I'm just gonna quickly wrap it up for everyone, and I'm just gonna move on. Okay, so what's coming next on the BLIX network? I've got a fantastic event that's coming next for our leadership group and for you guys to come along and share with us. And that event is going to be this. Sorry, guys, I'm just having some technical issues over here.
I love the suspense, though, Daphne. This is great. Well played.
And look at that, it came on just perfect. So this is the event. It's an I Am Remarkable event. It's a workshop by Google to empower underrepresented groups to speak openly about their accomplishments in the workplace and beyond. And this goes back to the discussion that we had today, guys. We spoke about imposter syndrome and feeling that you might be in situations where you're incapable of doing things. However, we have to understand that we're there for a reason. And even whilst we're there, we're still hitting numbers and remarks and hitting percentages that other people aren't able to achieve. So with this event, I advise you to come and to be able to understand that you have achieved great things and you can achieve great things and be willing to speak about it. And that is our next event. And
Brilliant,
I'll move on to the next slide.
Rafa, that's great. I'm going to put Ulrika in the spot because I can see that she's here and she's going to be the presenter for I Am Remarkable. Ulrika, can you give us a quick update on I Am Remarkable from Google's perspective?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. So we'll be running I Am Remarkable. Actually, it's an initiative that ran internally within Google, and we started it initially just with women to actually talk a bit about why we're awesome. And then we figured out it's actually a lot of men have this problem that they're not really confident about themselves, and it reached out to all sorts of groups, and we opened this up. So then we've been using this internally at Google quite a while now, and then we started using this with customers, and actually so I work in Google Cloud, and so we've been kind of exploring this with customers and brought this into mainly female groups into customers, open it up again. And hence, we want to do a workshop with BLIX and you lot, basically doing a workshop around why you're awesome and how do you tell yourself that you're awesome and what have you achieved actually, and get the feedback from other people that this is amazing. And just hearing that is a great experience. And that's what this workshop is about. There's a follow-on that we're working on. But this one, please sign up. It's brilliant. And it's going to be run by me as well as a colleague of mine.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ulrika. Sorry, back to you, Daphne.
Thank you very much. And we have been shown one example of an inspirational journey that Tony was delighted to share with us today. However, I can definitely say that as a BLIX team and as a BLIX society, we have the availability to give you more stories like Tony's, and that can be accessed easily just by going on our website, looking at profiles of mentors that are willing and able to share their journeys with you, literally for 30 minutes, for 1 hour, however long you have. There are many more people out there that are willing to give you insights into their industry, into their careers, and into their lives, and that can simply be accessed through the BLIX network. So guys, I just want to say thank you, because I can understand that a lot of us have had long days at work, but I also want to say thank you again to Tony for giving us the ability to just go through different emotions, from feeling that I've gone through that path that you've gone through. I've achieved some of the things that you've achieved, and the ability to finish that journey and just say, I can give myself a pat on the back and I can go through that stage of imposter syndrome, because at the end of the day, guys, we all know that we are capable and we are there for a reason. So thank you very much for joining us, and I hope to see you at the next event.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, guys. It was a pleasure. Thank you. Appreciate you guys having me. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. That was great. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.